It was supposed to be a quiet escape, a chance to reset after my divorce, to leave the chaos behind. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we get away for a bit, somewhere remote. A lakeside rental in upstate New York seemed perfect. Secluded, peaceful, surrounded by untouched wilderness. Exactly what I needed. We arrived on a crisp winter morning. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed a small package waiting for us. No return address, just a simple, handwritten note. Enjoy your stay. Make sure to stay warm. Inside the package was a tiny box of matches. Weird, but harmless. Christina laughed it off, joking about the quirks of people who lived upstate. I brushed it aside, too. If only I had known. The first couple of days were exactly what we had hoped for. Long hikes in the snow, hot drinks by the fireplace, total tranquility. The snow had been falling steadily, blanketing the world around us in an eerie silence. Then came the third night. I woke up to a noise. Faint, almost drowned out by the wind. At first, I thought it was just a storm, until I looked out the window. A single snowmobile, crawling across a frozen lake. It wasn't the machine itself that unsettled me. It was the fact that it was so late, and the driver was moving hesitantly, as if they weren't sure of the ice. Then, suddenly, they stopped and turned to face our house. The person climbed off and began waving frantically, as if in distress. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could tell they were shouting. Something about it felt off, but if someone was in trouble, I couldn't just ignore them. I woke Christina and told her to stay inside, then quickly threw on my boots and stepped out into the freezing air. The wind bit at my face as I made my way toward the lake. The person, a woman, was bundled in a thick fur coat, her hair pulled back into a tight braid. She was sobbing, her breath visible in the frigid night air. Thank God someone's there. My little boy, he's lost in the storm. Panic surged through me. A child out here in this weather? Alone? He wouldn't last long. But something wasn't right. I had expected her to say he had fallen off her snowmobile, that she had lost track of him, but she didn't. She said he had run away from home. That didn't make sense. Who lets their kid just run off into a blizzard? Something deep in my gut told me to turn around. Then she spoke again. You still got those matches? She was smiling. The realization hit me like a freight train. The matches, the package. She had left it, not our host. Before I could react, she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun. Wallet, phone, now. I didn't hesitate. I handed them over. In an instant, she climbed back onto the snowmobile and vanished into the wideout. I turned and ran. I shouted for Christina to call the police as I sprinted back to the house. She was already on the phone when I stumbled inside, locking the doors behind me. My heart pounded as I looked out the window, expecting to see that snowmobile circling back. The police arrived an hour later. By then, the fresh snow had erased any trace of the woman. They found nothing, no tracks, no snowmobile, no evidence she had ever been there. The Airbnb host was just as shaken when I told him. He swore up and down he had nothing to do with the package. He refunded our entire stay. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. How had she known we'd be there? And why go through all that trouble just for a wall and a phone? For a long time, I couldn't let it go. A part of me wondered if my ex-wife had something to do with it. I could almost hear her laughing at my expense. But in the end, none of it made sense. To this day, I don't know why she did it. And I don't want to know. There's a certain magic to childhood memories, especially those tied to a family getaway. Our lake house in Northern California was that place for me, a sanctuary of endless summers, laughter, and adventure. But now, I never want to go back. When my sister and I were little, we used to sneak into the attic with our sleeping bags, pretending we were camping under the stars. There was a tiny window up there, and we'd press our faces against the glass, watching people down by the lake, giggling at their antics. As we grew up, the attic became more of a storage space, mostly filled with furniture and keepsakes from our late grandparents. The lake house itself became a ghost of its former self, visited less and less as life got in the way. My parents didn't want to rent it out, worried that strangers might damage their precious antiques, until they met him, an elderly veteran, a disfigured man with a greasy beard and a voice like gravel scraping across pavement. My dad bonded with him over their military backgrounds and, against our better judgment, offered him a year-long lease. None of us liked him. There was something off about him, but my dad always dismissed our concerns. "You don't understand," he'd say. "Guys like him deserve a break." I wish he had listened. At first, things seemed fine. He kept to himself. My parents had the landscapers check in every now and then, not to be invasive, just to make sure everything was in order. Then, one day, the landscapers told my mom something disturbing. They had seen him watching the kids at the lake. Not just watching, staring. They caught him doing other things too, things they couldn't even bring themselves to say out loud. That was enough for my mom. She demanded my dad kick him out, screaming that we couldn't have a predator living in our home. When the lease ended, my dad let him go, gently, too gently. He didn't even tell the man the real reason. Just made up a story about upcoming renovations. The guy didn't fight it. He packed up and left. Or so we thought. A year later, my sister graduated college, and my parents decided it was a perfect excuse for a family trip to the lake house. We brought along our new dog, a black lab mix named Bear. The first sign that something was wrong, Bear wouldn't settle down. He kept pacing, ears perked, restless. I figured he was just on edge from the long drive. I was wrong. That evening, we went into town for dinner. We weren't gone long, maybe an hour or two. But when we returned, something felt off. Then I saw Bear. He was lying at the foot of the stairs, panting heavily, blood smeared across the floor beneath him. My sister screamed. My mom pulled out her phone, shaking hands dialing 911. Without a word, my dad stormed into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I followed, my own pulse hammering in my ears. We searched the house, room by room. Then we saw it, the attic hatch, not wide open, just cracked, enough for a faint glow of light to seep through. Someone was up there. I froze. My dad didn't. He yanked the hatch open and climbed up. I expected to hear a struggle, maybe even a fight, but there was just silence. Then, after a long moment, my dad climbed back down. His face was pale, unreadable. "It's him," he whispered. The old tenant. He had never left. For an entire year, he had been living in our attic, hidden among our old belongings. My mom was hysterical. She had already called the cops, and there was nothing my dad could do to stop them now. When the police arrived, they found him curled up in a corner, weak and disheveled. They carried him down like a lifeless doll, and then they found our spare house key in his pocket. My mom lost it. She turned on my dad, screaming that he had promised he'd change the locks. But the worst part? My dad refused to press charges. Even after everything. Even after he stabbed our dog. That fight between my parents was one of the worst I'd ever seen. We haven't been back to the lake house since. And I don't think we ever will. Some places make you feel invincible, untouchable. James' lake house was one of those places. His family was wealthy, the kind of wealthy where they owned multiple houses across the country, some of which they barely even used. His parents were never around, which meant we had unlimited access to a lakeside mansion with no neighbors to complain when things got out of hand. And trust me, things got out of hand. James threw some of the wildest parties I'd ever been to. But this night, it wasn't a party. It was just the two of us, sitting on the dock, drinking a few beers, talking about life. I had just gone through a bad breakup, and honestly, I just needed a distraction. That's when I saw it. A light flickering across the lake. At first, I thought it was just the moon reflecting off the water, but when I shifted my position, the light was still there. It wasn't random. It was flashing. 3 short bursts, 3 long, then 3 short again. James snapped his fingers. That's Morse code. I looked at him like he was crazy. What? 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. It means SOS. I pulled out my phone, skeptical, but to my surprise, he was right. Someone was signaling for help. For a moment, we just stared at it, unsure what to do. Was this a joke? A prank? Or was someone actually in danger? James wanted to call the cops, but we'd been drinking, and neither of us were exactly on great terms with law enforcement. Besides, we were the kind of guys who thrived on adventure, so we made a stupid decision. We decided to check it out ourselves. We dragged James' dad's kayak into the water and started paddling toward the house where the light had come from. The closer we got, the quieter we became. Something about this felt wrong. The house was big, just like the others around the lake, but it was clearly abandoned. The dock was half collapsed, sinking into the water. There were no lights on, no signs of life. The flashing had stopped. That was our second bad sign. We couldn't tie the kayak to the dock, so we beached it on the rocky shore and climbed out. James was already second-guessing himself. Dude, we should just leave and paddle all the way back, just call the cops? I asked, we're already here. I regret saying that. We circled the house, avoiding the front door. Eventually, we found an unlocked window and slipped inside. The house was completely empty, not just abandoned, stripped, no furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had ever lived there. James was officially freaking out, but I convinced him to press forward. We needed to check the second floor. That's where the light had been coming from. We found the stairs and crept up, our footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. When we reached the door to the room where the signal had come from, I paused, pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I glanced at James. He gave a nervous nod. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for one thing. A small old-fashioned film projector, set up directly in front of the window. My stomach dropped. This was a trap. Someone had set this up on purpose. James must have realized the same thing, because he suddenly took off, sprinting back the way we came. I didn't question it. I just ran after him. As we hit the stairs, we heard it, a door swinging open. Footsteps, fast, heavy footsteps. Someone was chasing us. We bolted down the stairs, through the empty rooms, straight for the window we had come in through. James dove out first. I scrambled after him. As I was climbing through, I heard the footsteps behind me, getting closer. I didn't look back. I just jumped. We sprinted toward the lake. But when we got to the shoreline, James swore loudly. The kayak was gone, and then I saw him, a figure, sprinting out from the side of the house. He was big, fast. I barely had time to react. James didn't hesitate. He jumped straight into the lake. I followed. The water was freezing, but I didn't care. I just swam, arms burning, lungs screaming for air. The lights from James' house felt miles away, but we didn't stop. When we finally crawled onto the dock, soaked and shivering, we ran inside, locked the doors, and called the police. They took nearly an hour to show up. When they did, they searched the house across the lake and found nothing. No footprints. No sign of anyone ever being there. The cops were pissed. They gave us the whole, "Why didn't you call first?" speech. James' parents were even more furious. Let's just say I wasn't invited back after that. But I can't stop thinking about it. Who was in that house? What were they planning to do? And what would have happened if we hadn't run?